Hey guys, I'm Alex, and today I want to talk to you about how I learn history. So, whenever I hear an event or just something mentioned in casual conversation, all the way on up to when I read about an event in a textbook or when I learned history back in school, I kind of add it to a timeline. And in my head, there's like very specific big chunks of time that are important. Like you have the early civilizations, which are anywhere from like 10,000 years ago when the last ice age happened, um, all the way to like 2,000 years ago, which is really, or sorry, to 4,000 years ago when we start seeing like the Egyptians really have a blossoming civilization. Um, and then you fast forward a bit and you've got the classic civilizations. Um, so that's when you've got like Rome and Greece, and you see a lot of Southern Europe being developed as like this knowledge center, along with like North Africa and the Middle East. Um, and there's also like a lot going on in China at the same time, and that whole Southeastern Asian region. Then the next era in my head is kind of this 1,000 year period of more or less peace, where a lot of things, a lot of bits of human knowledge went missing, and then humans sort of started figuring it out again. And so, like specifically to me, that's during the like 1100s to 1300s when humans started like figuring out art again. And if I find it really interesting, if you look back at the if you look back at art that's in like churches during this time period, it looks like at best like a wooden doll that's a children's toy, and it's a very poor representation of a human. I feel like for a lot of this time, it's humans figuring out how to be human, how to express themselves, and it all culminates when we kind of hit the 13 to 1500s, which is kind of the beginning to middle end of the Renaissance, uh, where we now have like a lot of enlightenment. We have a lot more discourse, where people are writing and talking about what it means to be a human, what are our obligations as humans, how should we run governments, how do we build societies, how do we establish good trade networks. Um, and then the next period is, and one more thing during that period is that we have like the Mongols right at the beginning, that kind of sideswipe the whole world. And so that's a very important event because, wait, actually, we'll skip that for now. Um, then the next major period after that is when the, in quotations, new world is discovered. And so you have suddenly this explosion of European migration, to Central and South America and somewhat to North America. You have French and Russian occupation of what is presently Canada, and you have a lot of international trades between Eastern Asia and Western Europe, which is something you couldn't really have before unless you were willing to cross a couple thousand miles of land and in many cases desert and mountains, which is a very hard trip to make. So then from there, that's like 1500s, into 1600s, we have like Baroque, which is a new evolution of art, more understanding of the human. Late 1700s, we have the French Revolution, which I think personally sets a tone for how governments start to look throughout Europe, and that trickles into like Northern Asia, specifically with like Russia, and then followed by well, okay, skip that too. Um, so yeah, and so we see like political revolutions taking the world by storm. And I will mention in this, I don't know a lot about African history, and that's something I'm trying to learn about, and something I think that like in school we touch very, very little on in the United States. So a lot of my timelines do leave out Africa because I don't know that much about it, save for like a few empires, the birth of the gold trade, and gold as a global standard, then with imperialization during World War II. But there are really a lot of events in Africa that are very fundamental to how humans learn to express themselves, how languages develop. Like Africa is probably the single most linguistically diverse region in the world. Um, and all of that history is kind of unknown to me. So that's something I want to explore. And as I learn, I'll share it with you guys as well. Um, but so yeah, so far we've talked about uh, like last ice age to kind of the blossoming of like the beginning civilizations. So Egypt, Rome, Greece, and or sorry, Egypt and China. Then you have like the classic civilization, so Rome and Greece. Then what is it? Yeah, then we have like this period of like you have the Silk Road, you have Arabian sailors coming south and trading with East Africa. You have um, you have the birth of Islam, and then after that we're at about 1300s, so we're at the Renaissance, and then after the 1500s we have the establishment of trade in the Americas. 16, 1700s we have long-term settlements in the Americas, and that leads to revolution. So we've got the revolution in the United States, we've got the revolution in France, and then the next period would be industrialization, a major proponent of which happens to be Great Britain. And during those next 100 or so years, we start to see a lot of mechanical technology, especially with the steam engine, which kind of became a sole source of power for lighting, for manufacturing, and for motion. With the late 1800s, early 1900s, we start seeing the car becoming popular. We start seeing tanks. We start seeing automatic guns, and we start seeing mass-produced products in the mid 1900s. And so we're really fast forwarding into the present, where suddenly we've got a ton of technology and just keeps coming out and coming out and coming out. And then during World War I to World War II era, so the first 50 years of the 1900s, we have a lot of connections in the world being made between countries who are there but not wanted. So like the British and the Dutch in India. You have several countries in Africa, like literally all of Europe is in Africa at that point. And even, in World War II, we have forgive me if I get this wrong, the Japanese in mainland China. You have the Germans and the Italians inside of Poland and several other countries. So the whole world is just stepping on every country it can. Then we have the Cold War period, which also starts the rise of proxy wars, as well as a bunch of new technologies. Militaries start growing in a very different way than they have before. We start mass producing products like clothing, guns. I say guns a lot because despite the fact they're not a commodity, they're very important for determining who has what territory. And you kind of can't establish a peacetime regime. You can't establish what products your country is going to make if your country doesn't exist. So guns do play a pretty large role in determining how technology is being used. And even to this day, one of the biggest budgets in the world is that allocated to military technology. And so that will come up time and again in history as we talk about it. Then the next part would be from and then you have the 2000s, which already in the last 20 years, we've seen a complete change, and just from the first 10 years, second 10 years. But we came out of the 1900s having like music where each decade had like its own genre of pop music. You had new types of instruments being made, and then you also had new amounts of data that could be collected. So like back maybe 20 years before 2000, you could only store a couple kilobytes of data on a computer, really. And then we're at the point today where a single picture or movie can easily be a gigabyte if you really push it. A picture can be a megabyte, a video can be a gigabyte, and that's like not uncommon. So we have computing technology, and the world is connected by the internet. Like at any given time, you can talk to anyone in the world, and that is something that's just never existed before. And we think just 40 years ago, there was no way to conceivably even do that. Like phones did not have any sort of capacity to connect people across the world unless you were paying extremely high rates. Not everyone had a phone in their house, and now every single person, including kids, has a cell phone and typically a smartphone. So you can get access to any information. So there's so many ways to break this down. But okay, so that was a lot, but there all these eras, I'll break them down one more time. So you have 10,000 years, well, you have biological evolution, then you have 10,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago, where you have ancient civilizations, we'll call them. Then 2,000 years ago to about 500 years CE, Common Era, which is AD in many parts of the world. That's the classic civilizations. Then you have from 500 to about, let's say 1200. That's birth of Islam and trade networks and, like, I will call it the steady period on Earth. 1300s, 1500s, Renaissance, 1500s to 1600s, discovery of the Americas and birth of trade networks internationally. 1600s to 1700s to 1800s, we'll say Enlightenment and political revolutions, 1800s to 1900s, Industrial Revolution, 1900 to 1950, birthplace of technology and imperialization, 1950 to, let's say, 1980, mass production of products and assembly line and the birthplace of, like, music as common in households, and that's going to be really important for later. And then 80s to 2000s, birthplace of computing, 2000s to the present, internet as just a landmark in time. So that's my timeline. And then whenever I learn about something, I just figure out what came before, what came after it, and do not necessarily just like math in my head, but like I'll fill in the information that I need to know. So, for example, when I met a woman on a plane who was from the Congo, like Democratic Republic of the Congo, and she was traveling to Belgium, and she told me, oh, it's like a second home for the Congolese. That like immediately clicked to me as, oh, this was because of former colonization of the Congo by Belgium. And then I had a context for, oh, so the relationship between these countries is good, even to present. Then I have the context of, I know Martin Luther King his speech was in 1963, his I Have a Dream speech. And then I think apartheid ended in South Africa in 1991. So now I have like a map in my head of how long it took for the civil rights movement to become popular, spreading from like one or two countries around the world to really spreading around the world. And then to present, where it's pretty much everywhere, in every country, there's someone fighting for civil rights. So I put everything into this timeline, and it doesn't just work for historical events, right? Because history is not just who was in power at that time and what wars were being fought. It is almost everything outside of that composes history. So it's, how do we view humans? What is the role of a person in a society and inside of a family? It's what kind of art are we making? It's how do people communicate? What kind of technology? What region are they communicating with? What food are they eating? Because crops have a very interesting history, how each one makes it from one part of the world to another. And I think I said before, corn is something that came from South America to China and now is a staple part of the Chinese diet. And that's something that you only really have a good understanding of if you understand the history of the regions and the trade between China and Chile, and then between South America and Southwestern Europe. So basically in my head is a map of the world and a timeline, and at any given point when I hear about something, I'm putting it on that timeline, and then I'm trying to figure out what caused this and what are the effects. So, for example, in I think around 1100, no, that's wrong. For example, of this, the Library of Alexandria burned down a couple of times, but it was considered like the storehouse of like human knowledge. Like it had scrolls from so many great philosophers, many of them had been copied down, and it it became a place for monks, and also was close to, don't remember the name of it, but one of the first major universities in the world, which was in North Africa. Um, and so it was this network of knowledge. And yeah, so we're looking at like what are the causes and effects of when we add an event to our timeline. So like actually a recent event that like helps this with perspective is, we know Google bought YouTube in 2006. Prior to that, there were multiple streaming services, but none of them really like had the center attention of the public. And now you could look at YouTube almost as like the exclusive platform for like the last 15 years of like content creation that everyone knows about. Like there are other websites that you can tell people about, and they'll be like, oh, that's interesting, but YouTube is a name like everyone knows. And so that's an effect now, is they became a monopoly in the, I guess, crowdsourced media sharing domain. So, but and now the effects of that are, we start to see them tighten regulations because we look at them more closely now that we know they're important politically and or important technologically. And then we realize, oh, they're having these policies that create friction with content creators. So now we can even project into the future, oh, there's going to be more content creation sites popping up. And we can look at it prior and be like, oh, the main forms of people learning things were through books and maybe a few online articles. Not everyone had internet. But right after 2006, we start seeing bit by bit by bit that entertainment comes in the form of videos rather than books and movies. And that even further, one of the main mediums of education is now videos instead of written things, and even news comes through video and in short clips. And so we can even create a timeline of like the effects and causes of YouTube's domination on the internet. So yeah, the summary of this is that you can create a timeline of some of the most important events in history, the things that you think are like turning points. So, you know, for me, the biggest one being the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. And when I look at that as a turning point, I'm like, okay, what happened before and what happened after, and how many people did it affect, and where in the world were they that they were affected? And so you want to divide up history into these like big chunks, and then when you learn a new event, you say, okay, which chunk does that go into? And it doesn't matter how right you are. Like I've been off by over 100 years before, but as soon as I got more information about like what other events happened that time period, I was able to like correct where I put it in my timeline. Then the other thing is, as you learn new events and stuff, you reorganize the events that are in your head. So you don't even need to know years. Years will kind of come naturally to you as you start to organize, like as you start to understand what caused what and what affected what, and it'll all just be a thing that like trickles. It's like a story, because the events are chronological. The events affect one another. They're not just here's a bullet on a timeline, here's a bullet on a timeline, here's a bullet on a timeline. It's here's event A and it became event B and it turned into event C. So you want to have like a good organization. And then the other thing is like it has to be fun. So like it's got to be relevant to you in some way. So if you're learning history and say you're of Japanese heritage, go out and learn some stuff that like Japan did, and like learn about when different practices were introduced to Japan, and when like say Nintendo became big, or when new types of ingredients for tea making arrived. Learn things about the culture that you're interested in, or your own culture, and be like, if you're a diehard American, like when were hot dogs introduced to America? When were they invented? What meats were they made out of? And at what point did we switch making meats? Like in the 1970s, it became illegal to make food out of horse meat. And so we stopped doing that. And that changes the content of a hot dog because it was previously like somewhat recycled meat. So, you now have a story for everything, and it makes you a heck of a lot more interesting at parties, in quotations. We'll see how effective that is. But you can now like not just talk about something in a certain time and place, or like in the present. You can't just talk about an event that happened to you. You can tell it as a story, because everything's more interesting as a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and it builds in tension, and there's things that happen, and there's this moment of you've learned something and they've learned something, and then there's this release of, or there's this like enlightenment or something, where the climax of the story, where you're like, oh wow, and that led to this event, and now I have like a reason for understanding it. I have a way to understand, I have a context. So it can be really fascinating to like understand history with context, and understanding it as this domino effect that is organized, so you know where every domino is. And then if ever you need information, you just pull out that domino, pull out the few dominoes next to it, and you can tell a story that happened from here to here on this part of the world, and soon to be in other parts of the Milky Way, so, or in other parts of our solar system. So yeah, history is very interesting to learn. If you learn it as a timeline, it can be a great tool. And later I'll also talk about more tools that you can use to learn history, because it is truly, at least in my opinion, one of, if not the most interesting things that you can learn, because it's not just some story of what happened. It is the story of how we got to where we are today. And it'll help us understand today, and it'll help us understand where we're going to go in the future. History repeats itself more often than not. So we can use it to predict things. We can use it to help us learn things. Like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel was invented. We look at how it was invented, and then we use it. So yeah, we'll see if I can edit this together. It's just wildly fascinating. So go out there and see if it works for you. There's a lot of history waiting to be uncovered, and you can be the one to uncover it. I'll see you guys next week. So yeah, there's a lot of history out there to uncover, and you can be the one to uncover it. So try out the timeline thing and see if it works for you, and see if it helps you to learn history better. Because there's a lot of history out there to be learned, and it's just waiting for you. Let me know if it works out in the comments. I'd be happy to hear you guys' stories. See you next week.